Hello and welcome to Roll for Mutation, Post-Apocalyptic TTRPG History. My name is Lowell, pronouns he, him, and with me is Marc Majcher, my co-host.
Hi, I'm Mark, he and them.
And this is a show looking at the various post-apocalyptic TTRPGs that are out there. We're not necessarily doing them chronologically. We did start with the Big Daddy Gamma World, but today we're talking about Twilight 2000. Marc, do you ever play Twilight 2000?
I did not. I was around for it. I may have owned it at one point, and I definitely looked through it and kind of immediately loved the vibe, but bounced off of the math.
Yeah, yeah, which we'll
Quickly.
definitely come to.
Yeah.
For me, I bought it. Some people ran it and played it, but then I kind of dropped off because it was definitely not my thing.
Hmm.
But because I managed at a game store for years, I could see how it sold and how it changed over the years.
Progression.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about what the game is about. We're going to be talking about what it sort of the gaming history is surrounding it, what the media touchstones are for it, and then we're going to be giving our general thoughts. So that's kind of the segments we're going to be working through. So I'm going to dive in. Game Designers Workshop released the original box set of Twilight 2000 in 1984. And this is in America, pre-fall of the Berlin Wall. It is Reagan's late
Mm.
Cold War vision. So that is a very dominant vibe that is there in America at that moment. We still believe we're all going to die in a nuclear war. Just keep in mind that that is in the background. In the setting of Twilight 2000, the East and West had been battling for 5 years back and forth across Europe. 3 years prior to the start of the game, nuclear weapons were launched, damaging all involved countries, but not enough to deal a decisive blow. So the war continues with diminishing number of troops, uncertain orders, and dwindling supplies. You play U.S. troops. They are at the tip of NATO's now collapsing drive into central Poland. And so you're fighting local warlords, militias, and bands of desperate deserters. Your operational position is overrun, and now you have to find a way to survive because HQ has literally just told you you're on your own. Yep. So the box set, the original one, includes a 24-page play manual, which has the rules, a 32-page referee's manual, map, 8-page charts book, and it is a lot of charts, an 8-page beginning adventure, character sheets, and the worksheets that are necessary for building your character, and a 12-page booklet with an exhaustive, and I mean that word very seriously, list of items and equipment, along with a separate price list. Your characters can be from either the U.S. Army or any European force, but with the idea being that in the later case, you picked up stragglers and deserters. Eventually, later supplements would add in if you want to have Soviet characters and so on. The book recommends at least half the group, however, be from the U.S. Army. And the longer objective that's built into the original book and then gets played out later on in the modules is getting back to the U.S. Creating a character is an involved process. We roll stats, we determine how much rads you've picked up, pick a bunch of specializations. There's a cool and center fire rating. There's just a bunch. You do need a worksheet to figure this out. The original 1984 game uses D6s and D10s, with the later being used for percentage rolls for most resolution tests. Attributes and skills don't interact. You either make an attribute roll or you make a skill roll. The only thing that attributes do besides that is impact some of the calculated characteristics like body combat damage and hit capacity. And then the other thing you have your character is you have an equipment purchase allowance leaning into the game's real focus on money, resources, and equipment. Besides that sort of logistics side of things, the other focus of the game is on survival and travel, with significant discussion in the rules for fatigue, terrain, upkeep, food, foraging, and maintenance. Combat is a thing. It is resolved in 30-second turns that are broken down into 5-second rounds. In each round, you can perform an action. The referee decides what any NPCs are doing, and then each player decides what they're doing, and then the sides simultaneously reveal their choices. This is an old classic declare, and then we go through and resolve system, which Never been my favorite, but there are some people that swear by it. Your choices in that turn are affected by your character's coolness under fire, which is kind of an interesting detail. In each combat turn, a character must perform as many hesitation actions as their coolness under fire rating divided by two, rounding the fractions up. You can conduct those at the beginning, middle, or end of the turn, or spread them out in any sequence, which is this a neat idea in concept, but it also means that you're having to sit there and wait.
Yeah.
Fire and thrown weapons are resolved simultaneously. Melee, body combat, and any fire at persons involved in those combats is resolved in order of highest to lowest skill. It then looks like the referee decides when non-attack actions are resolved in the sequence. It's not entirely clear. It is a lot of modifiers and steps. The combat rules take up 8 dense pages in the player's book, and there's another 6 pages in the referee's book. The rest of the player's book is covering character creation, and it has a skill system, but there's no actual, this is what the skill is. There are only like 6 default ones: combat rifleman, melee combat, body combat, wheeled vehicle driver, thrown weapon, and swimming. But there are blanks provided for another 40 skills. And you get some of these from specialization and so on. It leads you to a massive and like barely explained list of skills, each with their own inscrutable abbreviation code. So rather than writing in scuba diving, you would write in SCO or FRG for forgery. And of course, each skill has, there are 3 pools of skill points that you spend, but of course, you can only spend certain points on certain skills. It's like we're going back to Call of Cthulhu. Alongside the core box, the GDW released the Ruins of Warsaw, which builds on the seeds from the default adventure. And then the next several releases kind of follow up on that Polish zone and nearby areas, exploring more of it. So later on in 1990, GDW releases a new version of Twilight 2000, which attempts to update the setting to changes in the political landscape, i.e., the beginning of the fall of the Soviet Union. And then, because things were changing so fast, in 1993, they released another version, a sort of 2.2 version, that makes more changes to the core system and again tries to bring it up to date. In 1990, we have both the fall of the Soviet Union and we have the changes in how things happen with warfare and broadcasting and a 24-hour news cycle. There's a lot of things that are in there that they just can't keep up with. The one you're probably most familiar with is the 2021 Free League version, which is a new box set that actually goes back to the sort of the original timeline, sets it definitely in the year 2000, and focuses it on an alt history version instead of this focus on realism. It's still a little crunchy, but we'll come back and talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. To put Twilight 2000 in context, you look at role playing in general connection to wargaming. There's a lot of that in playing at the world. D&D, grew out of miniatures wargaming. Clearly, many of those first and second generation RPGs held on to a lot of that kind of DNA. Importantly, gaming shops usually had a good mix of miniature games. They had historical war games, they had board war games, they had RPGs, some other board games, but a lot of overlap existed in that audience in the early days before RPGs kind of split themselves off completely as a hobby. GDW grew out of a group of simulation game designers who, after founding the company, started what would come to be called the Europa series of massive, potentially interconnected war games covering World War II. Their first foray into war games was En Garde, which was a Three Musketeers type game that had a really wargamey campaign approach. Then they released Traveler in 1977, which was a very innovative early RPG, and that drew them further into sci-fi. And as they developed the Traveler line, both in and out of house, they released some more sci-fi war games set in the same universe. So by the time of Twilight 2000's development in 1984, GDW had released dozens of war games, it being as active a part of the company even as that market declined. Some of them were sci-fi like Mayday and Ashanti High Lightning. and some covered historical battles like Barlev, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, and Tac Force, and some were miniatures based, like System 7, Napoleonics, and Striker. Almost a dozen of these covered modern warfare, with more released during Twilight 2000's lifetime, eventually including a set of rules for modern warfare managers. And all that's to say, like many of the RPG companies of the day, GDW had its feet in both worlds. Like Chaosium, TSR, SPI, Avalon Hill, but perhaps more than most of them, it had a more even split. So while there have been more crunchy post-apocalyptic games like Aftermath and more military-focused post-apocalyptic games like the Morrow Project, Twilight 2000 was one of the first to take a near-future approach to the genre and really lean into the tactical survival elements. Fantasy Games Unlimited came closest with Merc in 1981, or Year of the Phoenix, which is a alternate timeline Soviet World Revolution game from 1986. There was Freedom Fighters, which is another post-apocalyptic game where people portray freedom fighters who have taken up the fight against invading Soviet forces, Martians or aliens that can blend into human society. That was also 1984. And there's also West End Games, The Price of Freedom, which is a game in Soviet-occupied America. And that was written by Greg Kostikian in 86. Twilight 2000 came out the same year as some other heavy hitters, for fantasy that included the collected edition of Rollmaster, Middle-earth role-playing, Avalon Hill's RuneQuest, and there's also several important licensed games like The Adventures of Indiana Jones or Marvel Superheroes, Ringworld, ElfQuest, and there was also several games that would have a oversized footprint like Toon and Chill and Heroes Unlimited, Mutant, Skyrealms of Jarun, and Paranoia, which we will be dedicating an individual episode to later. So the first half a dozen releases focus on that Polish campaign and offer scenarios and European area descriptions for the Lost Company that you're playing in. And then in 1986, GDW shifted the focus of the series with a module called Going Home that gives you a way for your team to return to the fallen United States. And going forward for the first edition, most of the releases wouldn't focus on Europe, but instead they'd flesh out various regions of the United States, with a few exceptions. And so while these adventures still kept a military premise, often with the PC operating under a command group to carry out missions in American regions, there's definitely more of a survivalist fantasy vibe to things. And if you look at the covers, they reflect this pretty strongly.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we mentioned before, in 1990, GDW released a second edition with some major changes that had the yellow cover, I think. The base resolution system was totally overhauled. The first edition was D10, and then a D20 in 93 for the 2.2 edition. The second edition added quite a bit, and generally the layout is much cleaner and less impenetrable. Those first editions have like the 3-column, really dense layout that is difficult and really shows their wargaming roots. But the second edition added things like some non-military careers for characters and actually explained what all the skills were instead of just relying on you figuring it out. And this revised version would become GDW's kind of house system for things like Dark Conspiracy and even Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. And importantly, they tried to update a history that was changing even as they wrote the edition itself. They're trying to integrate changes happening in the Soviet Union. To quote James Malachevsky on Grognardia, the result was a flat, unbelievable game lacking all of the historical and cultural markers that made the first edition so potent. And 2.2, released after that, tried to play catch up even more, but you do what you can. And then at the same time as Twilight 2000's second edition, GDW released Merc 2000, which was a more explicitly military soldier of fortune type of game without all of the alternate historical baggage. Their intent for that was to allow for the supplements for Twilight 2000 to be used for both, or Merc 2000 to be used for both. But that line eventually declined following a half dozen or so releases. So then in 2008, that version came from 93 Games Studio. That was Twilight 2013. And that was, according to one review, a hardcore dice-heavy simulation. The revised history and setting, there are an attempt to get the vibe of the old Twilight 2000s with the current state of the world in 2008, but it ended up being kind of weird and out of touch with actual history and geopolitics, and that line didn't last very long.
Yeah, there's a thing in the one review I read of it that says these people don't understand how the world works.
Yeah,
Essentially, the alt history they come up with is wildly uninformed.
yeah, I agree. But then we skip forward to relatively present day, and we have Free League Publishing's Twilight 2K, and that is subtitled Role Playing in the World War III That Never Was. And that returns to the key conceit of the original game in 2021 and doesn't try to revise the setup to fit with real world history. So instead, it gives us a world with a Soviet Union which survives into the late 1990s. And that's long enough for it to begin the ground war in Europe and have a limited nuclear exchange with tech nukes and whatnot. That one makes some big changes in making the characters potentially more international at the start. So you can be US, Soviet, Polish, Swedish, etc. Lays out clearly what kinds of goals a game can be about. There's staying alive, helping those in need, searching for information, finding a safe haven, staking a claim, finding a way home, or even resetting the world. Their year zero engine's emphasis on declining resources and risk and reward really play well with all of those ideas.
So it's weird putting Twilight 2000 into a media context because what would ultimately drive its vibe and approach, and that's the Tom Clancy techno thrillers, and in particular Red Storm Rising, that wouldn't come out until after Twilight 2000 release. Red Storm Rising comes out in 1986. There had been similar books before, but none hit as hard as Red Storm. It was huge. And that genre that kind of bloomed out of that and the wave of interest, I think, arguably played into Twilight 2000's success. Certainly in our area, in the store that I worked in and played at, we had a lot of overlap between those players, military gamers, and Clancy enthusiasts, particularly those who believed that Red Storm Rising was an oracle for what was coming. Now, prior to this, there had been some low collapse post-apocalyptic films. You can point to Mad Max, Escape from New York, Dawn of the Dead, and Omega Man as forms of survival in a fallen world without like real mutants. And Omega Man's an exception, but or radioactive fallout. The film that feels most inspirational actually is Red Dawn,
Yep.
which also came out in 1984. I remember seeing that in the theater.
Yeah.
Very divided crowd between people who were laughing and people who were telling us not to laugh.
Mhm.
So again, as with Red Storm Rising, Twilight 2000 managed to tap into some themes that were growing. You can see a little bit of this in some other films of the time, Invasion USA, which is 1985, Megaforce, and any vigilante film with a vet who uses their skills to get back as at the bad guys. These are responses to post-Vietnam critiques like Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter. And I think you can also point a little bit to the action films of Schwarzenegger and Van Damme in terms of legitimizing mainstreaming militarism and a certain kind of violent response to things. It strikes me you can also see some of the vibe in Marvel Comics' very serious take on G.I. Joe, which began in 1982. That was a comic series based on the toy that was largely overseen by Larry Hama for its entire 155 issue run. Eventually, there'd be a TV show, but that was much more cartoony than the comic book. Again, similar focus rather than direct connection to Twilight 2000 ideas. The one that for me sticks, and I'm making an argument here that I'm not entirely sure holds up, but boy, does it feel right. Another source for Twilight 2000 may be the vainish genre of, quote, men's adventure. So this used to be an entire shelf slash section of bookstores. If the Westerns weren't shelved separately, then they'd be lumped in there. But more what you got were stories of white men with weapons and expertise fighting back against a variety of foes, mostly ideologically and or racially coded. And in those books, we had two competing vibes. On the one hand, a belief in the collapse of society with limited war, failures on the parts of institutions, and desperate survivalism. On the other hand, we have a kind of belief in technocratic order. Technology, weapons, and military knowledge will see us through this crisis. So these series include things like Mac Bolan, also known as the Executioner, the Destroyer series, End World, Casca the Eternal Mercenary, Soldiers of Barabbas, The Survivalist, and a whole bunch more. A lot of these series, some of them literally came out of old pulp magazines like Men of Today and Man's Story. There was an imprint called Pyramid Books that did a lot of trade in these. There's a real bloom of these series coming out in the late 1980s with red-blooded heroes who survive the apocalypse and now have to kill everybody to make the world better. Here's the thing, though. I think there's a link and a vibe here, a kind of fascination with make-believe survivalism that overlaps with Twilight 2000, but Twilight 2000 itself wants to be more realistic. It isn't over the top. Instead, it's more relentlessly wearing. It's more like it was historical World War II film than an action movie, but that feel of red-blooded white men taking up their arms to survive against outsiders definitely informs all of this. So I think there's a connection.
Yeah, 100%.
So we can go back and forth. There's an interesting thing we mentioned when we talked about Gam World that there's a distancing of the apocalypse. It's
Yeah.
500 years in the future, and it's kind of vaguely described, but here it's really in your face. Like, this is our world. It's very, very close to the time. It's 15 years in the future, and things have fallen apart. Like, what does that do?
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like there was, so I also saw Red Dawn in the theater. I was 14 at the time, and it scared the living hell out of
Oh,
me, especially
really?
the opening parts, especially. I think the opening parts kind of made their impression, and the rest of the movie was just kind of a blur. But the part where they're like, they're paratroopers are landing and they're shooting up the school and rounding people up and everything, that was like, I was like, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds like it's going to happen. And I think like media and games like this, like you said, there's kind of a split response of there's people kind of playing it as a kind of gritty fantasy, like, oh, this is an interesting setting. What if, what would we do? Da 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 da. And then there's the other half who are like the survivalist prep type of people who are like, we need to play these games to understand tactics and know what we're going to do. And that's why, all these war games like this are really detailed and fetishize the weapons, even if the stats are like almost identical. And it feels like the two splits are, we are going to put ourselves in this fantasy world that is very close to our world versus we are going to prepare for this fantasy coming into our world. And it's a really weird split, I feel like.
It's interesting because it is the period where we start seeing survivalism and survivalists as a thing in general culture and pop culture. And there's a hint of what would become the militia movement,
Mhm.
Pacific Northwest and around the country that would eventually come in the 90s. But at first, it's kind of a prepper thing, a little bit removed from some political context. There's
Yeah.
even a Robin Williams film in which he gets roped into joining a survivalist group.
Mm.
And like, I want to say Walter Matthau is the buddy in that who gets him out of it. It was so weird that it was enough of a thing that you could write a comedy with
Yeah.
that as the joke.
Yeah. And there's like, it's interesting to see like where the media goes from like something that's like Red Dawn that kind of almost presents itself as a documentary to everything through almost like Damnation Alley, even like it was not necessarily like mutants, but it is a clearly like post-apocalyptic America. And although Twilight 2000 kind of starts in like Poland or Sweden or whatever now, and kind of pitches itself as like that European ground war thing, it definitely feels like a lot of that focus, like the actual focus, either I'm not sure if it's what they wanted to do or what the audience wanted them to do, like really focuses on that survivalism in a post-apocalyptic war United States, which feels interesting there.
There's also an interesting detail in the setup that I'm not sure. I wonder how they got there, if this is a feeling that they had, or if they just needed it to set up of America has collapsed
Mm-hmm.
and the authorities, the institutions of America cut you out
Yep.
and cut you off and leave you on your own. And that's a very interesting vibe to go with. It kind of gets turned on its head when you go back to the US and there are active technocratic liberal institutions,
Yep.
set up that are leading the charge to resurrect America. But it starts from a place of a very nihilistic view,
Yeah.
almost a Nixonian, like post Watergate kind of
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah. And it feels like sometimes it almost taps into the vibe of zombie media in
Hmm.
time. There's a whole philosophy of zombie media where, you know, either they stand for societal views, but also like in games, a lot of the time they stand in like where you would put in orcs or whatever that are just like excuses to be able to kill humans, which is not great in a lot of contexts. And it feels like some of that prepper survivalist post-apocalyptic stuff kind of mirrors some of that, like, oh, finally we get to drive through the inner city and just machine gun people down. And it's, oh yeah, that yeah.
Yeah. What is the movie after Dawn of the Dead, the Romero one that is set explicitly in a military base
Oh, there's so Dawn of the Dead is in the
in the
mall,
mall?
and then there's, oh, what is it? I know what it is. Day of the Dead is on the,
Is it,
and then there's Mall of the Dead later on, I think, or City of the
okay.
Dead.
Yeah. It's interesting because that one definitely has the more explicit
Yeah,
military thing. And of course, we would see that later with 28 Days Later and so on.
yeah. Even Dawn of the Dead has, I think it opens with them before they get to the mall, like going through a tenement house,
Oh,
and
yeah. There's a book called Horror Noir that I
mm,
read that kind of examines that and the fact that in that early part, that very much our our characters are explicitly killing non-zombie minorities. Like
yeah,
that's both critiqued and not critiqued in
mhm,
that instance. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. I could talk about the horror angle, like
yes.
linking up with the Purge and all that, but like that's a different
Oh
podcast.
yeah. No, we'll definitely come back. We'll talk about one or more of the zombie apocalypse
Yep.
games there. So the cover art. Let's
Yeah.
the cover art is, I will say this, it is universally bad.
Yep.
It is really bad. Now, mind you, a lot of it is of that time, but we were already by the mid 80s. We're starting to get real graphic design and real artists doing things, but whew,
Yeah. Up to the Free League stuff. Free League stuff is very
oh,
nice.
beautiful. Yeah. It's all of this GDW stuff that is weird. Actually, like the cover of Merc 2000 and its
Hmm.
supplement. Now that's the one that looks like a men's adventure book.
Hmm.
The covers to that. But the early ones, and I feel bad because that first cover of that box set is striking for its representation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's someone, of course, white who appears front and center, but we also have a black character. We also have two women presented in fatigues,
Hmm.
and there's another person that you might read as POC.
Hmm.
They're all military, they're all presented as equally competent. That's such an outlier for the time that
Yeah,
decision to do that is really, really interesting.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And there was, yeah, and again, like I don't know where that sort of, not necessarily disconnect, but sort of two visions of, especially cover art, but like even in-game art in a lot of places, there it feels like there's a lot of that sort of, white guy centric men's adventure, the default, right? But then there's a lot of, and I don't know if it's just like there's an artist on the team who realizes that's not okay,
Yeah.
or it is a decision, but it feels like I don't know, Aliens was later on, but it feels like there's a through line from
Hmm.
like people quote unquote slipping in women and other minorities into art like that to seeing this sort of like post-racial, post-sexual revolution integrated military thing that you see in later properties in the 80s sometimes
Hmm.
before it reverts all the way back again.
We do see one of the women again on some of the other covers. Like there are a few of those early covers where they use these as signature characters, and the white woman appears on a couple of others, but not really our black guy or the blonde woman. So,
Yeah,
but
I think in the first edition there's two example characters and one's a man and one's woman,
oh,
and
so
so
it might be the
yeah, and of course the man is the more combat oriented character and the woman's like a medic or whatever. But
absolutely, it has to be the medic.
baby steps, I guess.
Yeah. So I know you're a fan of Paranoia, and
Yes, I
I
am.
bring this up. There are some ones for covers for that later version of Twilight 2000 that they
Mhm.
have Jim Holloway of Paranoia
Yes.
fame doing the
Yep.
art, and it absolutely throws me off.
Just draws you right out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because his stuff is so goofy and cartoonish, and it
And it's so
just,
so distinct. Yeah.
yeah, it bugs me.
Yeah. It feels like a lot of the, and I don't know if this is true or not, but a lot of the early ones feel like almost like traced over clip art, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Like it's not a coherent picture. There's like, oh, here's a picture of this soldier and this soldier and this soldier that are all like lit from different angles and like composited together. I don't know who did the art or what their deal was, but yeah, that's just the vibe I get.
Yeah, it is odd, painterly, but weird. There is a thing too, when we get to the America side of things,
Mm-hmm.
we split into either we've got pictures of vehicles,
Yep.
just that, like for Airlords of the Ozarks, we've got a dirigible.
Mm.
Gateway to the Spanish Main literally has a pirate vessel on it.
Yep.
And then redneck chic, like survivalist stuff.
Yeah.
Oof. It's just very strange to me how we kind of split out there.
Mhm. Yeah. Have you looked much at the Free League one? I had not until like literally yesterday.
I had the box set
Mm.
because I really like Free League stuff. I'm a big fan of the Mutant Year Zero engine. I've run a lot of it, and I did pick it up and read through it and realized I could not get that to the table.
Mm. Because of
My group would not be ones that would want to play that.
yeah, tone wise or
And I say this in the nicest way, there's at least one or two people that I would not want to run that for because
mm.
they are at the very least centrist.
Yeah,
And I don't want to see that. But it's beautifully done. Like I
it
think it's gorgeous. I know Majcher has run some of it, and it looks neat. Like it is the perfect game system, I think, for doing that.
yeah, I'm curious. So I never played the original one, but I've played games in the same vein, right? I mean, I played a lot of like Car Wars or like Cyberpunk 2K when it came out, or just Cyberpunk when it came out, and a lot of the old three column death games. And I very deeply understand the wargaming roots of that. It feels like a lot of the very intricate, very like secondary stats derived spreadsheet kind of character generation stuff really comes from that wargamer desire to simulate instead of make up stories, right? And it feels like for Twilight 2000, like that really hits in a perfect way that mechanical wargame tactical stuff with the tone of the Russians are coming Cold War fantasy. And I wonder, what do you think about like how does the Year Zero stuff mesh? Like it's a completely different system, completely
Mhm.
different vibe mechanically. How do those mechanics sync up with the feeling of the story?
So there are a couple of things that happen in the Year Zero engine that I think really play into this. It's a little one, but it's got a very simple way to handle loadout and encumbrance. Basically, you've got X amount of lines based on your stat, and this is me remembering it, and a regular item takes up one line, or small items, you can put two of them on a line.
Hmm.
And like that immediately constrains you
Hmm.
on how much you can carry. And you've got weapon cards and things like that. So the equipment cards give a nice tactile feel to that when you're playing. So there is that kind of back and forth logistics. But the other thing that it does is in the base system of Mutants Year Zero, and I'm pretty sure this is how it is handled. You have your base dice, and then you have equipment dice. And when you make a roll, you're looking for X amount of successes. And if you don't get the number of successes that you want, you can re-roll. But
Hmm.
when you re-roll, dice that show a botch, then at that point, break down your equipment, cause
Right.
you stress, and it's it's really interesting how that tension over time, because it can be really challenging to repair your equipment. And it's very simple. Like, okay, if a thing adds three dice to what you're doing and it suffers, now it's adding two dice, and you can very easily track that. But when we played it and you mutant your zero, you'd go out into the zone and you're really thinking about, do I want to use my equipment on this? Can I risk doing this? Do I take
Mm.
the failure now, or put the thing in danger? Add to that very simple systems for you have to have food, you have to have water, if you get rads, real simple systems. It's all simple and abstracted, so it doesn't feel overwhelming, but it's still present. It's
Cool.
still a real tension.
Nice. Yeah.
Sideline, it's why I think that system doesn't work in Coriolis and some other games
Mm.
where that resource management and that deterioration of resources isn't the front and center thing. So
Right. But like Alien works because it's got the same kind of
yeah,
deterioration,
yeah,
stress, all that
it
stuff. Yeah.
swaps out for this that stress die that is really cool.
That's really cool.
You mentioned the three columns.
Yeah. And they read like war game rules.
Yeah,
It,
it is that first edition feels like it says you've got to study this. This is a textbook. If you can't get through this, then you don't deserve to play.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, so
Yeah.
weird.
And I was looking at some, in prep for this, I was looking at some other folks like stuff that they've done with it. And back then we just had like they had the worksheet in it. But I mean, putting together a character keeper with Google Sheets that does a lot of that secondary and tertiary math for you, where you don't have to do a lot of the math, feels like it might streamline it some. I don't know if it would make it good, but it feels like it would take a lot of the onerousness out
Hmm.
of character creation, at least. Yeah.
So, what else do you want to say about it before I hit some of my other points here?
Yeah. For me, even though I didn't play it, it definitely was a bright point in like my memory of games at that time because it synced up so well with sort of our American fears of nuclear war. And I think specifically like as opposed to Gamma World or whatever, where like there was an apocalypse and like that was it for people, and now there's talking bears and robots and mutants and stuff. It's that unique fantasy of like, oh yeah, like Russia tossed a couple nukes around, but we're still able to tool around the countryside and, and do what we like, and like it's a really again, there's like two sides of that nuclear fear in the 80s. One side was just war games like we're not going to make it, are we? kind of deal versus, oh, yeah, like this is going to finally give us the chance to be a warlord or a nomad or whatever, because it's going to be fine after World War III. I don't think it would be, but yeah,
Yeah.
that was a really interesting theme that came up in a lot of media and games.
The other thing I think is really interesting is this idea of them trying to play catch up with the
Mm-hmm.
history, because they are in 84, they're projecting 15 years out,
Mm-hmm.
and they're so wrong
Yep.
in ways that they could never have expected.
Yep.
because even even the highest echelon of US political circles didn't realize how bad off the Soviet Union was. Afterwards, it became obvious, but during that time, no one was willing to expect that. So that's
Yeah.
one of the big changes. And again, that 1993 tries to catch up with that. But the other thing is, you lived through this too. There is that moment with that first Iraq war where suddenly we get the 24-hour news cycle. Journalists are fully embedded. They are broadcasting the bombings. They are showing us the war as it is happening in a way that I don't think we could have expected at all. And I think that completely changes the tone and texture of what this conflict would have actually looked like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that they chose to, at least initially, try to play that catch up and try to modify the game to try to more accurately reflect the modern reality of it instead of just leaning into like, nope, we're going with our alternate history and just assuming that media and technology and everything kept going that way. And eventually, we came back around. But yeah, interesting choice.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. And it is one of those ones where because they do want to have verisimilitude,
Yeah.
they felt like they had to go with that. They had to do the predictive stuff. And it's so wrong.
Yeah. And that's the groggy wargamer impulse to like get it right
Hmm.
instead of leaning into the fantasy of it or the story of it.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing on that note, and I'm going to quote Wikipedia here kind of at length. So, according to Wikipedia, to create 300 years of background history for their science fiction RPG 2300 AD, GDW staff members participated in an in-house simulation called The Great Game that had Frank Chadwick, sort of the key designer of, I think, Twilight 2000, and I think Traveler as well, starting with the world situation in 2000 following the Twilight War. And so they take that as the starting point, and then players controlled one or more of the countries and guided them through development, FTL travel, colonization, other things. That whole build up of the world that ends up becoming Traveler 2300 is based on that. In fact, the reason France is a huge superpower in that future one is because one of the players played exceptionally well.
Yep.
And I think that's really interesting. Again, we see this at Origins a lot. We see this at Gen Con, these sort of military sim games and stuff that are for some people that's their absolute bag.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a, when you walk through those gaming halls, it feels like it must be such a unique, not a unique, like a special experience for them because there are these 20-foot long tables that are set up with all their terrain, whether it's a World War II sim or BattleTech or whatever. And it's like that's just not something you're going to do anywhere else.
Right,
And
right.
through a giant conference hall full of dozens of those tables, it's just really something to see. Yeah.
But the military sim ones, where it's just a bunch of people in a room, that's basically war LARP.
Yeah.
We're all heads of state. We're going to predict what's happening. Like that. Those are the ones that really get
Yeah.
me. And we had people in the store that took all this very, very seriously, and
Yeah.
were very offended if you did not take it as seriously as you did when they came up and explained to you why this particular piece of micro armor was the better US tank. And so it's just whew.
Yeah. The again, it's like almost fetishization of the pages and pages and pages of equipment and
Oh yeah.
different but remarkably similar guns and tanks and armor and whatnot is and I probably still have a bunch of books that have those 50-page sessions of like here are all the different guns. And it was, I don't know if it was just like a fun like catalog experience, like here's my fancy Sears catalog, or I was one of those kids who read the encyclopedia for fun, right? And so like, is it just fun to look through all these and like think about the differences, or is that going back to the wargamer need to have detailed simulation stats for everything just in case this particular gun comes up?
Oh yeah, I remember those books, sort of the Palladium's books, and there were some other
Yeah,
ones, and we have in the series we certainly have these vehicle guides that are like essentially Jane's guides with game stats
exactly.
for things, and it bleeds out into other genres. I'm certain that you have all the Chrome books for
Hmm.
Cyberpunk 2020. I mean, those are
Yeah,
just big shopping catalogs,
yeah,
aspirational.
yeah, and like it's interesting. Like those feel like more explicitly shopping catalogs. I mean, in fiction, they are
Yeah,
definitely shopping, and they are more. It feels like because Tangent Cyberpunk, had that same sort of technical simulation feel originally. It feels like the Chromebooks were more of a push to be like, oh right, we're cyberpunk. Style is supposed to matter over substance. So we're not necessarily like giving you stats for more different similar guns, but we're like giving you stylistic modifications or things that you can wear that don't necessarily do anything but look cool. And so it's an interesting divergence from that
yeah.
military.
Yeah, the Small Arms Guide, Infantry Weapons of the World, Heavy Weapons Handbook, Heavy
Mm-hmm.
Weapons Guide. These are all books in there, vehicle guides. I've never looked at it, but now I really want to because I've seen the cover of. Have you ever looked at Twilight Nightmares?
I have not, no.
This is the book for Twilight 2000, second edition, that essentially adds in horror and fantasy and stuff. On the cover, there's some kind of zombie, there's a
Oh,
dinosaur, a crashed spaceship. It's like they were like, okay, well, maybe we can draw on some other people on this thing.
that was amazing. Well, yeah, T-Rex right there.
Yeah,
I'd
just wild.
never seen that before.
The last thing I want to say, and then I'll throw to you, it is interesting the very small niche of military games,
Mhm.
games where you explicitly play military personnel in a semi-realistic setting. So not like Aliens where you're playing Space Marines, but we had prior to this, we had Commando, which was kind of a board game. And then there was Behind Enemy Lines in 1982, and that's from FASA, which is a World War II game. That same year, we had Recon from Palladium and Merc from FGU. Recon covers Vietnam. Merc is a role-playing game of counterinsurgency. But it's not a genre that really caught on. There would be some other second editions of Behind Enemy Lines and Recon. There would be the most military catalog version game ever, which Phoenix Command, which is basically a set of weapon tables.
Mhm, mhm.
And there would be some other ones we mentioned, The Price of Freedom and Delta Force and stuff. But I don't know. I'm kind of relieved that this as a genre has sort of died off.
Yeah, and it feels like they do, especially the early ones, like they do hew closer to like this is basically a war game where occasionally your guys talk. I think part of it is just, there is a limited audience for that kind of thing, but part of it is just like they don't want to have a military drama or military story where we find out, about these people's lives and what happens as they go on the travels. Like they just want cool fights and
Hmm.
battling their way and dealing with supply lines or lack of supply lines and scarcity and stuff, and playing out that sort of post-apocalyptic survivor fantasy. Whereas more modern games that still focus on that kind of stuff, although they may still have they might still have the tactical veneer on it, but they are more oriented towards telling the stories of those people or that
Yeah.
world. And I think that people who enjoy the other kind, like you can just fall back to straight up war games and
Hmm.
plenty of those.
Yeah. And certainly Twilight 2K from Free League puts the sort of goals and objectives first
Mhm.
in a way that's really interesting, has you have relationships between the characters, and I think that's a really interesting move.
Yeah.
it is a game, Twilight 2000, where again, it starts out with the premise that America has fallen and American values have fallen, and yet American know-how and can-do-it-ness and nationalism and imperialism can still win out.
Yep.
Like it makes me cringe when I see one of the Twilight 2000 second edition books is Bangkok, Cesspool of the Orient.
Ooh. Wow.
Like,
Not
oh
great.
my Lord. Uh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a weird game, but like it's the 80s.
Hmm.
There we go.
We're still figuring stuff out, guys.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Twilight 2000?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I have no desire to play it. So that is something off my list of things to get off my plate there.
Absolutely. Thank you, listeners. Roll for Mutation is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. We have a Patreon that supports this podcast and everything else. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. The community itself is a group of players. We have a online calendar. We run games each month. There's a feed of actual plays from a bunch of the GMs that you can check out if you're interested in these kinds of things. Marc, anything you want to pitch, mention?
Yeah, I've got all my games up at major.itch.io. And if you go to major.com, you can find all my links for everything.
We'll have links to that in the show notes. Thank you for listening.